My name is Chief Ian Campbell. My ancestral names are Chalik and Sukyoosiam. I come from the Squamish and Musqueam peoples. It's my honor to welcome you to our village of Snock within the shared territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh. One thing I'd like our visitors to appreciate is the ancientness of where you are, that this land has history and stories and secrets that have occurred for many thousands of years and many chapters of change and transformation. I remember as a boy, my elders told me about the man from Snock who harpooned a seal with an elk tine harpoon head. The seal swam down to the head of False Creek and went into the deep hole known as Squachais. Squachais is also known as a portal. This portal will bring you into other spirit realms of existence throughout the universe. So we believe that there are many stories of change and transformation that have occurred within this area over the history of our Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Stories of change and transformation, of tricksters, of triumph, and of love. Welcome.
What's often known as Siwash Rock is a place in our territory that has a story that's associated with it. And one of the things to understand is that our land was our classroom. When our ancestors were raising our children to be, contributing members of society, they would raise them with teachings and upbringing to understand how to be a good person, how to conduct themselves as a human being in our community, and what was the good thing to do and what was the bad thing to do, how to live the proper way, and all that kind of thing. And so the way that they did that was, our land is filled with history that would often be retold, orally from generation to generation, to be a physical marker, a physical place and point where these lessons could be associated with. So young children, when they're coming of age, when they're going through their education, the elders or the older members of their family would take them through the territory and teach them about all of the places in their territory where there was significant stories and history and lessons to be taught. And that was the way that we would help raise our community. And because it's a physical place, as you live here, as you operate in this environment, the land is constantly reminding you of how to be a person that is good in this world. The land is constantly there to remind you of these teachings. It's not something that's in a book. It's not something that's on a computer. It's not something you have to memorize. You're constantly being reminded of it. So that's the interesting thing. Siwash is a word that comes to us through what was called the Chinook jargon. Chinook jargon was a trade language used from Alaska to Oregon. And it was a mixture, it was kind of a pidgin language jargon. It was a mixture of Salish words, Nuu-chah-nulth words, languages from the Columbia River primarily, as well as a little bit of French and English.
So you could trade with people.
Yeah, it was a really easy language to learn. You could learn it pretty quickly, and if you were a fur trader or what have you, you could pick it up within a few weeks and be able to trade with it.
Even white people.
Yeah, and a lot of English and French words were contributed to it because of that. So in our languages, though, in the languages of this area, the word in our languages are the same. Same word, basically, just a slight different pronunciation. It's a different accent or different, it's like a difference between calling something in Italian versus calling something in Spanish. They're really close. Two slightly different languages, but the same word, more or less. So in Squamish, we call it Schaelsh, and in Hunkaminam, it's called Schilich. And the word in both languages just refers to someone or something that is standing.
So if you were growing up many years ago, or maybe even people still today, and you see that rock, basically it's a reminder or a teaching to be steadfast, basically?
Yeah, to be committed. They say that the Chais were a representation of spirit. They were, for some people, they represented the Creator itself. That it was the Creator who had sent the Chais here, and that they had the power of the Creator when they came here. And so there's an interesting lesson in that our ancestors, although they respected the power of the Creator and the gift of creation, they also didn't see Creator as this all being everything that that required their absolute devotion,
Not
or
a guy with a beard on a hill.
Yeah, and so there was a thing where disobeying the Chais wasn't something that was, it was permissible. It was something that was within the realm of possibility.
Right.
To defy that type of.
So it wasn't a punishment.
No, and there's something interesting about that. That there's this kind of idea of no false idols.
Right.
And that our people were willing to still recognize that they are human beings and that they can do things in this world, not because some spiritual lesson told them that they have to do it that way.
Right.
And that they were still willing to question those things and still willing to determine for themselves what the future was going to be. I think there's something powerful in that.
Yeah. Just even taking the time to even begin to understand.
Yeah, and I think that's why, even like learning some of the place names in this territory as our communities have become more willing to share that information. Mm-hmm. Learning these place names for the territory really becomes an entry point to all of that.
Right.
But actually learning the names of these places as they've been called for hundreds of thousands of years.
Antomi, Tanoyap, Tansaquetels, Yuan Hatli Quachnomi wit, Wauchet Hachkach, Tisnu Ayet, Tikuquain Stalmoch, Awan Oxton Squalwin. First of all, I am very grateful to all of my elders and my mentors for their instruction in our traditional teachings. It's an honor to be here to talk about rethinking education. And for me, my upbringing began with my grandparents who raised me and my sister and instructed us in the rich teachings of our Coast Salish people through our Squamish Snechum, our Squamish language. My late grandfather, Chief Lawrence Baker, was an orator in our longhouses. We would travel throughout Coast Salish territory, down into Puget Sound, Vancouver Island, the Fraser Valley, throughout the Lower Mainland to visit many of the longhouses where the echoes of our ancestors resonated through our languages, through our songs, and our stories. When I was a young boy, my grandfather would take me to the mountains here on the beautiful coast, where we have beautiful mountains just an hour outside of where we are today. And this was our playground growing up, traversing the alpine meadows, swimming in the beautiful lakes, and hunting. My grandfather would often instruct us on our spiritual beliefs by showing great respect and homage when we walked through the forest for all of our relatives, the animal people, for the forest, the plants, our connection to Eos, to all of our creation. As a boy, I took it for granted that this was common knowledge, that this was something that all of my peers were being instructed in. But as I became an adolescent, I realized how fortunate I am to have had such beautiful teachings. For these teachings were largely oppressed through Canadian legislation. Our languages were forbidden in the upbringing of my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation. So the tenacity and resilience that my grandfather exemplified really instilled pride in my responsibilities. My grandfather groomed me to step into his shoes as a hereditary chief. Since then, I had many other mentors who I honor and remember in my heart, the matriarchs, many of our grandmothers, who were gentle but also very strict with us. For if we make a mistake, those grannies would not hesitate to pull us aside and scold us and correct us. And it was always very humbling to have these beautiful matriarchs in my life. So this made me think about relationships. But when we were in Tibet, the hospitality of the people was truly remarkable, for they brought us to many monasteries throughout their lands. And one of the monks posed a question to me. He said, put your stories in chronological order. He said, what would the first story be that your people would tell? So I thought about it. I said, like many cultures in the world, it begins with the universe in darkness. For us as Coast Salish people, we talk about Taskauk, the spirit of the raven,
Etaquyetk, the seagull, Etaqwaqwat asquile, the box of daylight. And this story talks about how Raven coaxed and coerced Seagull to unlock this box of daylight, to unleash that breath of life that created all of the realms of existence. For we believe in many parallel realms of existence, including this physical realm. So our story talks about our first ancestors that were created in Chuquatl, over here on the Sunshine Coast in our village of where Gibson's is. And I started thinking about the stories that I heard growing up. I thought about our first ancestors and how that represented human versus human. For at first, these early ancestors, they would have great discussions about Snu'ayach, about the teachings, about Chiach, the laws of creation. But of course, the human impediment started to interfere with their relationship, where pride, ego, jealousy, all of these darker sides of our existence in this physical journey started to show themselves. So those people subgrouped. And as the world became populated, many people remembered those teachings. But of course, some people bend the rules. Actually, we all bend the rules in one way or another. But these stories talk about how some people developed peculiar behaviors. So Chaka'anak, the creator, sent down the Cha'ais, the Transformers. Great movie made after them. No, I'm just kidding. But the Cha'ais represented these mythical beings who could transform into anything. And as these beings traveled the earth, they came across people and they transformed them. Some they immortalized into these beautiful mountains that you see behind us, Cheyoyalhuek and the twin sisters known as the lions. They transformed Tselchwam, the Tantalus Range, where mountain goat hunters and their dogs caught in a blizzard. The stories are written all around us. Tleilka'alsh, Siwash Rock, out here in what is now Stanley Park. These are all ancestors that were immortalized. And they transformed all of the animal people, the Slathalam, the Squatian, the Takaya, all of the beings that we see today. They were able to transform everyone, in fact, except for Shayetlan, the salmon people. For the salmon were already a very powerful race who lived out in the ocean realm. So the Cha'ais made the arduous journey to travel out to implore the salmon, Mechayap, come to this physical realm. The people here are suffering. The land is suffering. We need you. And quotes, the spring salmon chief said, why should we? We have no reason for me to send my young people to your homelands. So the Cha'ais implored them and said, we beg of you. So the agreement was that for us as humans, we must respect the beautiful salmon people. And the first salmon of every year that is caught has to be treated like our most honored guest, where the bones, every single bone is put back in the water to facilitate transformation, Nuch Ayansot. So many people followed these teachings, but today we see ourselves again bending rules and veering from our connection to creation. So these stories help us understand our collective responsibilities along with our own personal choices that we make. We continue on with the beautiful mythology of our people that talk about another catalyst of change known as the Ice Age, or Ice Ages, for it was a succession of waves of ice ages. This is where scientists try and pick up our story and tell it for us, that somehow we came across a land bridge. This is not our story. This is one story of many. For we talk about how difficult it was for our people, how many people around the world were decimated, the populations dwindled. It was very challenging, not only for Squamish, but for all of us. For we are the direct descendants of those people who survived and endured the ice ages. Each and every one of us is connected. If we talk about our stories, you'll recognize Kayapalanoch, known as Kapalaino, Chatzlanoch, known as Kitzalaino. These are two great names that connect us back to the ice ages. For these were some of the umbrella of families that kept the people alive by sharing their snu'ayat, their siyatwa, their wealth. And by sharing that with the people, they helped keep us alive. So to commemorate those times, they bestowed Lanoch as a suffix to some of those great names as Kepalaino and Kitalaino. You will be quizzed at the end, so believe me. But these stories, again, talk about catalysts of change. For after the ice ages, the waters rose drastically. Not another story isolated to Squamish, but a universal story. For every place I've traveled, be it in Aotearoa with the Maori people, they talk about the great floods and how they arrived by their canoes. The Tibetans even showed us Mount Kailash, their beautiful sacred mountain. That was their place of haven during this difficult chapter of human history. For us, we have 3 sacred mountains here on the west coast. Inch Kite, you will recognize as Mount Garibaldi. Sculpt's Quote is Ice Cap Peak in the Ilaho. And Hosak, this beautiful mountain to the south known as Mount Baker. These became our places of safe haven during these floods. The waters were torrent, and the canoes went in all directions. When the water receded, we could not go back to the way it was before the floods. We could not go back to the way it was before the ice ages. We can only draw forward that traditional knowledge and apply it in a modern context through adaptation by utilizing the best tools available to us. After the floods, the people developed a wonderful culture, a very rich and vibrant culture here on the West Coast with vast networks of trade and commerce, a strong economy that generated great wealth amongst our people with the bounty of this land. We had what we call taswat tseitsap, professionals and specialists who knew how to navigate the high alpines, known as tlathnayam, the high alpine specialists, right down to the seafloor, the Nuxchatwait, the Nuxchayet, and all of the hunters, the fishers, the ladies had their disciplines, the weavers, those that procured food. Everybody had a role and a responsibility. And of course, we mark another catalyst of change with the arrival of European cultures in 1791, where we discovered the first ships in our waters here of the Salish Sea. So this is an exciting era. For again, we cannot go back to the way it was during our great-grandparents' day. We can only draw forward that traditional knowledge. We cannot continue to perpetuate the myth that Canada is founded solely on French and English. That denies our own identity as Canadians, one which is founded on a solid foundation of Indigenous nations. So we go through Truth and Reconciliation today. It's an exciting era as we see what does this mean to you individually? What does it mean to us collectively? For we have been invisible in our own land for a very long time. And it is now time to celebrate that our history is your history, that this is a part of rethinking education. But we have to bring them up there and teach them to slow down out of this city life, slow their pace down, be cognizant of their breathing, be cognizant of every step that they take. And this is teaching them to balance their life. I'm very proud of our youth. I'm very proud of our mentors that we had. I am simply a relay runner. I simply accept the baton from my predecessors, ultimately to bestow that onto our future generations. And that to me is a continuity of tradition. So I'm excited to be here. I want to thank you all for your attention today to this very exciting topic of rethinking education. I'm excited about these stories because they truly reflect and inform me as to who we are and where we are in this exciting timeline together and what is possible for our future. So thank you very much to each and every one of you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.